Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Straight Talk. This is our third episode in what we call a no-nonsense discussion with leaders in clinical operations and clinical business operations. My name is Anca Maria Copescu. I am the CEO and founder of Strategic and Pharma, and I will be your host for this session. Before we get started, just a couple of announcements. First, we have 2 more live events going on in June. The first one is going to be on June 8th. It's going to be a live webinar in which we will be discussing best practices for fast, accurate planning and budgeting and clinical studies. And we hope that this is going to be a highly educational session for the upcoming 2022 budget season. And then we have a second live event that's going to be on June 28th. I'm going to be the host of that event as well, and it's going to be a webinar about transforming R&D procurement with a particular focus on clinical outsourcing, leveraging technology. Also, just a few housekeeping items. If you have questions, use your GoToWebinar panel to post the questions. We will be monitoring those, and we will be taking questions at the end. And also, we will be recording this session. So if you cannot make the whole 30 minutes or you want to replay it for your colleagues and see it later, we will be distributing it shortly after the end of this discussion. So with this, I would like to welcome our guest, Bruno Gagnon. Hello, Bruno. It's a great pleasure to have you here today. For those of you in the Bay Area, you know that Bruno is quite a well-known figure and thought leader. He is the Senior Vice President of Clinical Operations at Eidos Therapeutics, which is a bridge bio company focused on rare diseases. He spent more than 30 years in the industry working on both sides of the aisle for CROs and sponsors. Actually, Bruno and I worked together at BioMarine when I was heading outsourcing and he was heading operations. This talk is of particular importance to Strategicon and to me personally, because Eidos was Clinical Maestro's first customer. We had our very first live RFP event with Eidos, and it's really a very nice retrospect from being a startup company. I believe we had only 3 or 4 people at the time, and an MVP product to where we are today, close to 40 customers in our Rolodex. So very special session. Thank you, Bruno, and welcome.
Thank you. And by the way, I love the name Straight Talk, that first series. Like, people who know me, they know I'm a straight shooter. So I think we're going to have a great chat, Anca.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I will start with an easy question. So, Bruno, you've been with Biotechs for a long time. Tell us, how important is the vendor selection and the clinical outsourcing process for a smaller emerging biotech that may have a limited pipeline? How important is to get that vendor selection right? And how easy or how painful is that, particularly in the context of probably not necessarily having a full outsourcing department?
Yeah, well, I see this question maybe in 2 parts, because you say how important is outsourcing or selection of vendors, and it's critically important, because small biotech companies, we rely heavily on CROs. So without CROs like we have, we can't execute studies. And then you talked about the process. How important is the process? Well, it's still important because it allows us to be more efficient and better at what we do. So if you have, like, say, no process at all, or you're just kind of improvising as you go in terms of your selection, you're going to make mistakes. It's going to take longer. You may end up paying a lot more money. So the bottom line is that when you select a CRO, you want to have the best CRO options. So the better fit, the better price, and eventually, it will end up in better quality of your study execution. So thinking about the context of full service CROs, because that is usually what we do within small biotech, but it can work also with service providers that you would select for like specific functions. Let's say functional service providers. So it can be painful. We don't always have the right staff. Sometimes we need to grow the folks. But overall, I would say the process, people who are well organized and put together a decent process. It doesn't have to be over-engineered, but I would say it's important in terms of the quality of your selection that you make.
How is that different versus, say, a larger company? Do you usually have the luxury of an outsourcing department, or is it more people like you and people in cleanups who are running the process?
We had a department, but when we started, we did. Sometimes you're lucky enough to even just having an outsourcing professional. So one of the first hires I made, I think maybe when we were about 2 or 3 people in the department in clinical operations, we decided to appoint somebody at least in charge of outsourcing. That was their full-time job. But yeah, small biotech companies don't have typically an outsourcing department. And that's how it differentiates from big pharma. They will have a group of people. Some people maybe have a finance background. Some people may have legal, procurement, or cleanups. For the smaller companies, we try to have, I would say, some built-in, let's say, skills or core competencies. And if you don't have dedicated resources, it will be typically left to like clinical operations, more like generalists, like people who are good with budgets, who are good with, let's say, vendor management. They may be responsible for a CRO selection, a given process for a given study. And that's a little bit where the challenge will come, is that if you have a person who does this for one study, the next study you do, it might be somebody else, right? Because it's not, you don't have that much consistency, and you don't always learn from your mistakes or maybe efficiency. So it's important to have some, what I would call, institutional memory. And if you can gather these processes and these lessons learned and the good choices you make, if you can actually keep this easy to share within your own company, even if you're a small company, it's helpful. So for me personally, I like to have clinical outsourcing professionals with good systems and good processes in the background to help them be more productive.
So I know very well, actually, I remember from my times at BioMarine that it took a good 3 months to do, let's say, a phase 3 vendor selection soup to nuts. And we did have an outsourcing department, but it still required the effort of many. Not only in the RFP process per se, but a lot of it in the due diligence, the discussion, the scoring. It was really the effort of many. Yeah. What do you see as, say, the pain points in the current process, if you can point some?
Yeah. Well, first I'll go back to the resource. I would say, yes, it takes a lot of effort, right? It takes a group of people. If it's well done, no, you're right. It could be 3 months. It could be, definitely like 6 weeks to 12, 6 to 8 weeks minimum to do a good CRO selection for a phase 3 or an important phase 2. And then a lot of people will put, I would say, like almost a full-time job for several days or weeks to put together the specification. So this could be maybe at the same time, like the pain points, like exactly what is it that you want? Like, what do you need from the CRO? So you need to know internally and align on that. Are we looking for a CRO that has the right therapeutic area? Or is the priority more like, oh, we have the therapeutic area expertise in-house, but we don't have any kind of scaling up capabilities, and we can't do anything outside of the US. So maybe your need is to find a CRO who can execute ex-US. So you need to have, and people sometimes forget to do this, really agree on what are the selection criteria. Then you put together your RFP. And I would say that might be a pain point. It's extremely time consuming. It could be manual. It can be a lot of spreadsheets. How do you put together your RFP and your bid grid if you want to be able to compare CROs? Then the other aspect is that maybe another pain point is that people don't always have time. So let's say you have 5 or 6 functions represented on your selection team. Then you need to review the proposals received from the CRO. I can tell you, and that's maybe like news flash from people on the CRO side who are listening to this, like sometimes people don't even read the proposals. Like just 1 or 2 people will actually take the time to read the proposals. So you got to read them, you've got to analyze them, compare and contrast, like what are the good points and what are the more negative points. And then you need to invite CROs to bid. So here's another pain point. In the last 2 years, we were not able to meet with the CROs. It was all done virtually. So that was also a different aspect. Now people are starting to go back to an in-person bid defense, but bid defense can be time consuming. Very often I've seen people put aside maybe a day and a half for bid defense meetings, like 2 to 3 meetings, they could be 3 to 4 hours each, and then you need to regroup after that. Look again at opinions of different people. Some people will use scorecards. You've got different tools, but you still need to align and say, what is the CRO that we want to choose from? And then at that point, there's going to be the award. So you need to align, and then there's the award. So it's time consuming. It can be manual process. It's alignment, like herding cats sometimes. And then you get a super important decision, because the CRO you choose, you'll be working with them for the next 3, 5 years. Who knows? It depends on the size of your study.
Thank you for bringing all of this up. And actually, it's funny because we did a survey in which we asked the CROs what are they spending most of their time on, and they said in the writing of the proposal. And the sponsor was asked the same question, and they actually spend the least amount of time in reading the proposal, but they spend the most amount of time actually in the budget due diligence. Which we know it's really no easy undertaking, especially if the bid grids are not aligned. So here it comes back to our experience in 2018 when you were really one of the early adopters of Clinical Maestro. And I know it takes a lot of courage. Nobody wants to be the first to try out a new technology. It takes entrepreneurship spirit, likeness of technology and innovation. And Bruno, you were very bold, because not only did you give us the chance to work with you, but you actually gave us that chance on a pivotal phase 3 study. Actually, I remember we used both Clinical Maestro modules. We started by putting together various scenarios and planning the clinical study. Then we sent it out to multiple vendors. And I remember distinctly, my heart was racing when that button was sent, sent to vendors, because it was our very first live RFP event. And it was going to some big CRO names. So tell us a little bit, did that experience alleviate some of the pain points that you spoke about, such as putting together the RFP or the due diligence around the budget or beyond?
Well, first of all, like maybe what went behind my idea of like trying to work with you on this, and we knew we were maybe it was not 100% ready, but in the end it was, right? And it's like when you have to be, let's say, an early adopter, you need to take some risks, but these are calculated risks. There's always some kind of backup. So I was not afraid. If you say your heart was racing, mine was not. I've been stressed with other things, but not that. We knew we would be able to do a good selection process. And some of the pain points from the very beginning were the fact that when the proposals are coming back, they go into the system and they get compared. Like it's kind of a form of automation. And I know maybe some people were doing it in the background, but it was seamless to us. So when you start reviewing proposals and they are nicely put in comparative tables, and you can see the cost of monitoring and the cost of data management and the cost of project management and drug safety kind of compared one against each other. And this is a true apple to apple comparison, because the CROs had to bid in the system. Therefore, everything was normalized, or at least it was standardized. And there was like a lot of tools given as part of the service where we could look at, I don't know, what is the average cost, and maybe each CRO you can see if they are outside, if they are an outlier. Now, another thing that you didn't mention, but a technical feature of Maestro is that it also gives you the budget before you receive the bids from the CROs. So once we had the RRFP ready, and we knew how much it was supposed to cost based on the tool that calculates the cost, then when the CRO bids came back, we knew that we were in the right range. And then maybe, I know you have the numbers, but I think we were within 5% maybe, or even in this maybe the phase 3. Yeah, maybe remind me, but I think we were within 2 to 5%. Each CRO was within 2 to 5% of the maybe the median.
Yes, I think we were at around 300,000 variants, total variants, at the average budget at, I believe it was between 24 and 29 million. So it was extremely accurate, which was the first live accuracy test for us as well. But Bruno, talking about that, how important is actually to have an estimate of the budget before you bid? And do CROs actually, do biotechs actually do this exercise, go internally through some scenario planning, or just go straight into a selection process and hope to get to the middle ground through bidding? Tell us a little bit of your perspective on that.
Well, first of all, the budget process starts sometimes very early. You don't even have a protocol, and so you're going to put some large numbers. Like people can say, oh yeah, a phase 1 study is 1 million, and a phase 2 is 10 million, and a phase 3 is 50 million, right? You kind of start with high-level ballpark like this. And as you get closer, if you have a phase 3 study starting, let's say for me, if I have a phase 3 next year that starts in Q2 of 2023, this year I'll need to put a much better budget, but I don't always have the tools. So sometimes you go with past experience, or you ask a few CROs to give you a ballpark, but then you kind of start getting a little bit biased, because if you already ask CROs, you don't really have a protocol yet. So when you have at least specifications, high level, let's say I would call the cost drivers, like number of countries, the length of the study, number of patients, things like that, then having a more accurate budget is quite important. And it's not a tool that everybody has. As I said, different people use different things. So if you have a tool like Maestro, or if you have your own spreadsheet that you use, and you would say something that is quite accurate, first of all, it creates expectations internally. And then sometimes people in finance or in upper management, they might be surprised of the price. And then they say, well, no, that cannot be that expensive. What are you talking about? And then you start receiving bids from CROs, and then it validates. Like if for some reason it would be completely off, then you would have at least a point of reference. Also, sometimes people, when they say, oh, well, I don't need a tool like this because I'm going to get 3 bids from CROs and I'll see the average. But you may have 2 CROs who are too low and one that is at the right price that may be, let's say, 15% higher. And people will automatically assume that the 2 that are too low, because they're closer together, that's the right price. But maybe 2 made a mistake, and the ones who got it right was more expensive. So a tool like my Clinical Maestro will give you this kind of unbiased approach, with more like mathematical and based also on your experience with the industry in general. So you can pull data from hundreds of clinical trials, and you have a more accurate number. So I think you use this as a validation of the cost that you're receiving from CROs, and you can use it to negotiate also.
Yeah, in fact, we did an exercise recently with you in which this was without a license. It was a consulting project in which you gave us protocol and specs. We met with your team, we built the budget, and we gave you back the budget. And I believe you did use that to support the vendor selection. Can you tell us a bit more about that experience?
Absolutely. So this was in an area where we knew who we wanted to go with as a CRO, but normal practice would tell you, oh, you need to still do an RFP to make sure the price is right. But we thought there was something wrong with that picture. So we said, why don't we get an accurate estimate from Clinical Maestro? And in this particular case, we did as a service, as you said. So we sent you the information, and it took, a few weeks. I think it was like 10 days, something like this. And we received so then we received a process, like a pricing from you, detailing by functions. Then when we received the CRO budget, it was not even a full proposal. We told the CRO, send us your budget, and if the price is right, we'll go with you. So we looked at it. They were right on, again, probably within 5%. And then we just awarded the CRO. So a non-competitive bid, or sometimes people will call this single sourcing. So to them, it saved them a lot of time, because they knew they were not competing against others. They just knew that they needed to put the right team together, the right price, and then we were able to save them time. What often this will happen is that this saving, they can pass it through to the client. So sometimes you will see this as a bottom line discount. Some CROs will say, we'll give you a few percentage points of bottom line discount if we don't have to do competitive bidding or no bid defense, for example. You can still meet with the team before the launch, but it's not really called a bid defense. And then often CROs can give you, or you can ask for a discount on top of the normal pricing you have, just because you save them time. They will really appreciate it.
That's actually a great point, because we see this also going on in large pharma, where most of the sourcing is non-competitive. Nevertheless, the sourcing teams do need to do budget due diligence. They do go through various rounds of bidding, but they don't have a comparison arm. And sometimes, even if there are agreements on the rate cards, or agreements on fixed unit pricing, for example, for certain items at the MSA level, it's still non-trivial to validate that what has been agreed has actually been applied. So we play the control arm for a number of such non-competitive bids, which is quite relevant. So you don't necessarily need to go competitive unless you are searching for certain expertise, and that saves everyone enormous amount of time. So on that point, I know we don't have a lot of time left, but I have here $1 million question for you. What do you see as the future of outsourcing, especially now when the environment has changed and a lot of biotechs are suffering? It's very hard to hire outsourcing staff, which is, as you mentioned, that it's critical for the health of a company. People work remotely, work from home. I'm in Lisbon today, for example, and you need to also work in a collaborative fashion and still maintain that knowledge of a company someplace, regardless of staff turnover. So where do you think the industry is heading?
Well, I think a big gap that we have is resources, as you mentioned, because of like either the gap of experience, and then like people they leave their job and they go start working somewhere else. I was talking last week. I said everybody wants to be a YouTube influencer. Nobody wants to be a CRA or a manager. Right? Everybody wants like a new job, and it's hard to find good resources. I think part of the CRO sponsor relationship, we need to kind of identify adequate resources, train them, and work on to retain them. And I think these kind of relationships would work better if the industry would collaborate. For example, agree that we cannot always have people with 5 years of experience in our studies, because otherwise, like, how would you train people? Like the people who come from, let's say, college, or come from, I don't know, they were a study coordinator or they were a school teacher, and they would be interested in working in clinical trials. We need to give them a shot. Like we need to allow them to be at least a CRA with 1 or 2 years of experience. So if teams of sponsors and CROs would collaborate together as part of maybe I would say a more strategic partnership, would allow people with a little bit less experience, but we would train them more, would spend, or the price would be adjusted for that. We say we'll give you a blend of people with a lot of experience with a few new people, but it will be the future of your teams eventually. And if you work with the same CRO, like you repeat business, these folks that you bring in who are maybe talented and smart, but they don't have a lot of experience, later in your study or when you go from phase 2 to phase 3, now they know you, they know how you work, and they have a process to really make a difference. And the other aspect, I think, as part of the future is like better use of the technology and the systems that we have in place. So more access to data with like more remote things, like remote source verification is important, like direct source documents who go directly into your database. So if you use better systems, you can be more efficient, and you don't need to spend all your time being at the site. You still need to go and visit your sites and develop relationships. Same thing with CROs and sponsors. They need to kind of improve the relationship of the people who work on the team, but you can spend a little bit more time like when you are in person on things that matter, as opposed to just like spending time checking data.
So here's a final question for you. There are a lot of fears when it comes to adopting technology. We often speak to people like you, heads of operations, heads of outsourcing, and they are so swamped in their day-to-day work, they don't sometimes have time to see a demo of Clinical Maestro that's going to make their life so much easier at the end of the day. So they they free up time and spend more energy towards analytics. So what advice would you give to a colleague in terms of taking a risk and trying out new technology?
Yeah, well, it's ironic because we are in the drug development business. So by definition, you would think we innovate, right? We bring new drugs to the market, we bring new therapies to patients for things that they need improvement. So I feel we also need to do this for processes. And if we remember, like the first time you use an EDC or an IXRS, people were afraid. They would say, oh, that looks really cool, but I don't want to do it on my study. My study is too important to try something new, but it doesn't really make sense. So I would say try new things, see if it works for you. You can take some small risks. You don't put every eggs in the same basket, but if you want to try a new system for a study, you can have either your backup plan, or you could say, well, we'll use it on this smaller study, do a pilot, and then work with the vendor if you want to try a new technology. Ask them to kind of take a little bit of risk with you. So maybe you can have like a risk sharing, first try, or a contract that maybe will not necessarily bind you for the next 5 years. You can say, well, let's like do a trial period for the next 3 months or on this one project. And I have to admit, it will take a little bit more time the first time around. So the first time I did an EDC in the, I don't know, early 2000, they said, oh, you need like 3 months like startup time because it takes longer to do EDC, like the planning, than if you would do paper CRFs. So you got to understand that it may take a little bit longer in the beginning, maybe a few iterations, but you will gain it back. You will gain it back later. This investment of time the first time, you will be happy when you do a second or third project with the same, let's say, new technology or new system.
This is absolutely right, and we've been doing a number of case studies measuring efficiency of clinical maestro, and some of the things that we are hearing is the reduction of the selection, be it competitive or not, by almost half. A savings from having a fair market value or benchmark budget that are sometimes north of 10%, which can mean really millions of dollars when you're talking about a large study. So technology pays for itself. We are looking at 10 times ROI on the technology investment. And it's not that risky. As you said, the world is not going to collapse if you try a new approach. But trying, it's the only way that actually supports entrepreneurship and supports streamlining current processes and really trying to come together to a better process and a more efficient process. So I know we have about 5 minutes left. I want to ask my team, are there questions out there in the GoToWebinar?
Yes, Anka, we do have a couple of questions here. The first question for Bruno is, as an executive in clinical operations, what aspects of the outsourcing are most important to you after the study is awarded? For example, change orders or CRO oversight or reforecasting. And what do you see are the challenges in the current process? And you've got like 3 minutes to do it, Bruno, but thank you for taking the question.
Well, I'll go brief. I'll go a little bit more strategic and then kind of go in the weeds. But like I think the most important, when it's awarded, I think it's the kickoff. It's how the team will gel, because the project you award is never the project that you will end up with. So you've made this decision based on budget and the team, and you need to figure out a way to align on how this team will work efficiently together. And from that moment on, after that, other aspects will be, and I go a little bit more technical, you need to track your project to plan, right? Are we on track for, let's say, enrollment or startup? And then one aspect will be budget. Are we spending at the rate we're supposed to spend? For example, if you had a budget for SIVs and you say, wow, we're only halfway through the SIV in this study, but we spend 80% of the SIV budget, there's something wrong. Do we need a change order? So some of these aspects that will be important once the study is ongoing is think about it as CRO oversight, CRO management, and budget management. So having a good system to track the spend, let's say the spend rate or the burn rate, and then change orders. Like you got to be able to do change management, and the tools that are offered to you can also be very helpful to save time in identifying like when's a change order or change notification goes above the threshold and now you need a change order. A change order that takes too long can hurt both parties. So I would say that's an important aspect once the study has been awarded.
That is actually very much our focus, has been our focus in the last 18 months. In late 2021, we launched our lead application for out-of-scope tracking and budget monitoring. So looking at the spend versus time and reporting activities completed, which also supports not only reforecasting, but supports finance and accrual management. And we had just 3 weeks ago an announcement for our 3.0 release that enables processing of change orders with reconciliation. That was not an easy product to bring to market, but super excited that it's now live with our new edition. And these are all very, very painful points throughout the life cycle of a study. Any other questions, Karen?
We do have one other question, but I realized that it is 9:30 and I know Bruno had a hard stop. So perhaps we can address this next question to you. So we just have a couple more questions and then, but if Bruno needs to stop, the next question is about is it common that ClinOps professionals are naturally siloed into disease areas for their current and past companies? Their RFPs and outsourcing forecasting is backed by personal experience. How can Clinical Maestro, this is go to you, Anka, how can Clinical Maestro help a professional moving into the other disease area?
Is the question for me?
I'm gonna let you answer this one. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go, and I'm gonna let you answer this one. But thank you for having me. It was great to chat with you.
Thank you, Bruno. We'll share the recording with everyone. I'll take this question. So Clinical Maestro is a process tool. It's therapeutic area agnostic, but therapeutic area elements and components are built into the algorithms for predicting cost. And they are also built in our library of specific questions that you would ask during the RFP process. And we have some 700 questions which were contributed by our user community, and the database is only getting larger. So really, regardless of the therapeutic area you are in, that maybe you had some experience, for example, in estimating the budget with certain parameters in a particular area, Clinical Maestro makes that knowledge universal, in the sense that the intelligence is already built in across all the therapeutic areas in the solution. So you can easily go from one area to another.
Excellent. Well, that's all the questions we have. So if you'd just like to wrap it up for us, Anka.
Well, I just want to thank you for attending today's meeting. Again, as a reminder, we have 2 upcoming events. June 8th, webinar about planning and budgeting clinical studies, very much ties to today's talk. And on June 28th, another webinar in which we will be focusing on best practices for clinical outsourcing, with particular focus around leveraging technology, and hopefully you will see live. We are going to actually also do a demo in that webinar, some of the components that Bruno spoke about it today. So thank you so much, and keep joining our Straight Talks. Thank you.